I'm Craig Snyder, the president of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia, and it's my pleasure to open the Council's annual Atlas Award dinner. As you can tell, I offer you my apologies. I'm struggling with a frog that is lodged in my throat, so I apologize in advance for pounding on the amplifiers with clearing my throat. We do have a few people who apparently are stuck in Eagles traffic. All of us Philadelphians have waited our lifetime to have people stuck in happy Eagles traffic like this, so we're going to take that as good news. But there will be some people, I'm sure, who come in to fill in some places as we go. But we're going to get started because we believe in respecting those who are, in fact, on time as much as possible. As you can see, the servers are going to be placing your appetizer course, and feel free to start as we go through the program with the entree to be served at the conclusion of the program portion of the evening. The Atlas Award of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia recognizes individuals and organizations providing great humanitarian service and reflecting and representing the Council's now nearly 70-year-old maxim, in a democracy, agreement is not essential, participation is. I want to begin by thanking all of the Council's corporate and individual supporters represented here this evening. Not only are you supporting the message about feeding the world that we are discussing and conveying tonight, but you're also, as you know, supporting the World Affairs Council's education programs in the middle and high schools of the greater Philadelphia region. Tonight, we honor Corteva Agriscience with our 2018 Atlas Award. And to first introduce Corteva to those of you who are not so familiar, I want to ask you to take a look at a short video, which we will run now.
Agriculture. It sustains us all and drives what we do. Growing food for tomorrow and growing tomorrow itself. Hand in hand, enriching lives, never settling, ever. We're growing progress by making every crop, field, farm stronger. We're growing progress by being the most innovative, most inclusive, most open agriculture company in the world. And our new role will bring more innovators to the table. Employees, producers, consumers, the best of the best. We'll work together, not just to meet standards, but to set them. We are Corteva Agriscience, and this is the company we're creating. We're one company. We're leading the way. We're growing progress. Introducing Corteva Agriscience.
For hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, otherwise smart people have been predicting that the world couldn't feed the growing human population, that large-scale famine and the reduction of population was around the corner. In my lifetime, humanity has more than doubled in size, and both the quantity and quality of calories available to the majority, certainly not all, but the majority of humanity, in the vast majority of places, has in fact increased and improved. So the predictors of disaster have, at least so far, been wrong. How has this happened? How have the predictions been made to be wrong? In a word, science. From the man who may be the most important person that most people have never heard of, Fritz Haber, who invented nitrogen fertilizer, to Norman Borlaug, who led the Green Revolution. The human mind has proven to be the ultimate, and so far at least, inexhaustible natural resource. Now, in our time, demographers tell us that the population will grow to about 10 billion by around 2050. And so again, the question looms, how can we feed so many people? And does attempting to do so require environmental devastation such that the world may not starve at that size population, but the negative effects of the technologies employed in agriculture cause other great problems? Some look at this question, this challenge, and see a really dystopian future. Again, a future in which famine looms and the lucky ones are eating algae. Others think we are headed for a realization of the kind of happy predictions of my childhood from Star Trek and the Jetsons, in which pretty much anything you can imagine to eat is available with an ease and abundance even greater than it is for most Americans today. Corteva Agriscience and its leader, Jim Collins, are and will be key players in determining which of these roads, the more positive or the more negative, is taken in the future of feeding the world. It is somewhat unorthodox for a for-profit enterprise to be described as engaged in humanitarian work, not in terms of charitable giving or philanthropy, but in terms of its core business model. But Corteva's public commitment to a conscious capitalism undergirded by transparency, by integrity, and sustainability with respect to the mission to help feed the world surely makes it appropriate to be described in this way as a kind of humanitarianism. And so it is my honor and my pleasure to present to Corteva Agriscience the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia's 2018 Atlas Award. Please. Jim.
Great. Thank you very much.
With that, we're going to ask you to make your presentation. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank you.
Please.
Great. Well, thank you, Craig, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the 22,000 fine men and women of Corteva Agriscience around the world, I want to take a moment just to thank everyone here at the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia for this incredible honor. You know, I think it's especially meaningful coming from this esteemed organization, one that has done so much to advance honest, open, and civil discourse over the years. And I don't have to tell anyone here tonight that honest, open, and civil discourse has never been more relevant or needed in our society. These traditions, I believe, are the very pillars of the democracy that we live in, and we must never lose these very vital foundations. So tonight's recognition also hits pretty close to home, quite literally. You know, few families or few companies or communities have a stronger or more historical tie than Philadelphia, the DuPont family, and the DuPont Company in the Brandywine Valley. You know, the DuPont's family patriarch, Pierre Samuel DuPont, was a French economist and an intellectual who became a very close friend of Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and several of others of the founding fathers right here in Philadelphia. You know, he would write to Benjamin Franklin often, sharing his ideas in letters and essays about the very principles of democracy. In a passage of a letter written to Franklin in October of 1768, it's noted that Mr. DuPont's ideas clearly had an influence on our founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin wrote in his note, "Dear Mr. DuPont, I received your essay on the 10th of May, and I have read it with great pleasure and received from it a great deal of instruction. There is such a freedom from local and national prejudices and partialities, so much benevolence in mankind in general, and so much goodness mixed with wisdom in the principles of your new philosophy. I am perfectly charmed with them, and I wish I should have stayed in France for some more time to have studied in your school." Well, we all know that by 1799, Mr. DuPont had moved to America, and when his son, E.I. DuPont, established a gunpowder mill on the banks of the Brandywine Creek in 1802, it set into motion one of the most successful and enduring enterprises that America has ever known. Now, through the years, the sons and daughters of Philadelphia and these environs have fueled this enterprise with their very strong work ethic, their intelligence, their passion for innovation, and we look to that leadership in this region more so often today. And so I'll explain this leadership a little bit later in my remarks. Now, on a personal note, tonight's recognition is also very meaningful to me and my family. I'm a second-generation DuPonter who grew up in North Wilmington and attended Delaware Valley Public Schools. I live today in Pennsylvania with my wife, and we've raised two young men, one who is a proud graduate of Penn State University, the other from the University of Delaware. So you could say we're all in this community, in this region, just like our new company, Corteva. So as Craig mentioned, and you saw from the video, Corteva is a new company. It's a combination of DuPont's crop protection business, Dow's Agriscience business, and the venerable seed brand and company Pioneer. A combination of these three great institutions brings us nearly 400 years of experience. But I like to think of it a little bit differently. Put another way, I look at ourselves as a 400-year-old startup, one that's beginning with a clean slate. So at the center of this new beginning is this name, Corteva. It's a combination of the words meaning heart or core and a word meaning nature or earth. So when we put them together, we have a company that is at the very core or the center of nature or earth, focused on ag productivity and making that the center of everything we do. So I know what you might be thinking right now is, wow, that's a pretty ambitious brand promise for a new company. After all, we are the product of three big ag industry players, an industry that traditionally has not engendered a lot of public goodwill or public support in terms of its connections or its consumer practices. And I can say tonight that some of that, by the way, is deserved. But we like to think that we have a chance to not only lead our industry, but influence the entire food value chain through our actions and our policy towards more sustainable agriculture. We also know that if a brand is a promise, then a great brand is a promise kept, and we won't be satisfied with anything less. So our name, in essence, is also our mission, it's our purpose, and it's our grounding mechanism for who we intend to be. So that all starts with putting farmers and consumers at the center of our entire business model. Incredible things happen when we empower those who work in the soil and those who derive sustenance from that work. So what I'd like to do is share with you a short film that I believe really captures this philosophy.
Humans have been farming for over 10,000 years. The birth of agriculture is what took us out of the caves and into civilization. But after all these years, the way we've farmed isn't the way we'll have to farm. You see, in 2050, we'll need to feed nearly 10 billion people. For that to happen, we're rethinking how agriculture works. We plant seeds that increase yield at a local level, protect crops with precision, and we use data and analytics to predict the weather and improve crop health. This is the farming of today. Imagine what we'll do tomorrow. We are growing progress, and with this goal in mind, we've made two companies into one. Introducing Corteva Agriscience.
So for the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a look under the hood at Corteva. You know, we've only been at this for 9 months, and we've accomplished a lot since last September. You know, I think of it as a new model car that we'll talk about tonight, or better yet, maybe the better analogy is a new model tractor. More important, though, I'm going to share with you some of the insights on the global forces that I believe are reshaping modern agriculture today, and some of the implications that those pose for our nation, our world, and our community right here in Greater Philadelphia. Now, it's because of these massive forces, these secular trends, that we are shaping a different kind of company, as I mentioned, a company that believes it has a major role to play in feeding this growing planet, but doing it responsibly, sustainably, and with the utmost integrity. Now, specifically, we see three pervasive trends today that are shaping not only the ag industry, but you could say that these trends are shaping the entire world. Three interrelated forces that impact everyone in this room and everyone on the planet. And they are food security, food integrity, and technology. So let's look a little closer at these. Food security. We've heard a lot about this recently. At its core, it's about feeding a growing planet, as Craig said, while ensuring that we have the land and the resources and the technology to do it safely, securely, and effectively for generations to come. Without question, food security has become one of the most pressing geopolitical issues of our time. It affects all of us: consumers, farmers, suppliers, retailers, local communities. We're all a part of what we call this dynamic ag ecosystem, especially right here in Pennsylvania, where food and farms generate over $135 billion worth of economic activity. And believe it or not, agriculture in Pennsylvania employs over 500,000 people. Creating a more sustainable ecosystem is a challenge that won't abate anytime soon. The world, as we've heard earlier, is expected to grow from 7 to 10 billion people by 2050. That's right, 3 billion more people in just 30 years. Let's put that in perspective. That's equivalent to adding the current populations of China, India, and the United States to our planet in just 3 decades. That's a planet of 10 billion hungry people. People who will be expecting us to nourish them with safe and nutritious food that does not compromise this fragile ecosystem needed to produce. For us in the ag industry, it's a big challenge, and not for the faint of heart, but a challenge that farmers around the world today are willing and they're excited to step up to. So with population growth, we're also seeing urban encroachment on available farmland. So crowded nations like China, which don't have enough available farmland to feed their own people, are now buying massive swaths of land throughout the world in places like Africa, South America, and Asia. So with this dynamic, concerns are growing over now foreign ownership of lands, environmental standards, and some labor practices. As you all know so well, this will continue to be a hot issue in world affairs in the coming years. So balancing this population stress, farmland availability, environmental protection, and consumer demands for fresh, local, and nutritious food is really nothing less than playing three-dimensional chess. But it's something we're going to have to master, and we're going to have to do it quickly. Closely connected to food security is food integrity. This is the second trend that I mentioned. Consumers today want clean food with simpler ingredients. More and more, they want their food grown naturally, and they want it responsibly sourced without preservatives or pesticides. At the same time, activists have become more vocal and demanding, and these same activists and consumers have never been better equipped to share this information and knowledge. In the next 24 hours alone, millions of social media conversations will be centered on food. Tomorrow morning, if you went onto the internet and typed in the words food and nutrition, you would get more than 600 million citations. People are talking about what they're eating, what they're drinking, what they're cooking, and what they're buying. And they're talking about where their foods are sourced, where they're distributed, and where they're retailed. And they are giving their opinions about these experiences every minute of every day across multiple social and digital platforms. Now, these conversations are leading to purchasing decisions and brand building opportunities. And these same conversations can either burnish or tarnish brands with just the tap of a keyboard. At Corteva, we know that we need to be actively engaged in these conversations, which again, I can say the industry probably hasn't done in the past. So this leads to the third major trend I wanted to touch on this evening: food science and food technology. Today, we have at our disposal an array of groundbreaking agricultural technologies that allow us to create tighter connections between farmers and consumers. For example, drones that allow farmers to have incredible visibility into the health of their crops, sensing devices on tractors that can identify the presence of invasive species and pests, big data tools that can allow farmers to optimize their planting and their harvesting cycles, as well as managing their financial back offices, RFID chips that dispense the right amount of food and water and nutrients to livestock when it's needed, where it's needed, and infrared diagrams that show water drainage patterns so we can manage runoff, and seed enhancements that dramatically reduce the fertilizer applications and other inputs to better protect the environment. The list goes on. Plant science, I believe, is at the absolute precipice of a new golden age. You know, I wish I could take you all to Johnston, Iowa. It's just outside of Des Moines. There, on 600 acres of land, we have experimental plots and laboratories. Our people are conducting some groundbreaking research dedicated to advancing crop genetics and improving cropping systems. Now, this land, by the way, is the same plot of land that Henry Wallace, the founder of Pioneer and a former USDA Secretary and Vice President of the United States, first planted his experimental fields almost a century ago. And this was the same land where agricultural pioneer George Washington Carver spent some time conducting his experiments while Carver was a student at Iowa State University. In fact, Carver lived with the Wallace family during this time in history when African Americans were prohibited from living on campus at Iowa State. You know, that sense of social justice is indeed a part of the DNA of our company, and it always will be. So today we have thousands of researchers at that Johnston campus who are working tirelessly to develop seeds for corn, wheat, soy, canola, and other crops that are more resistant to drought, to disease, and certainly the whims that we see lately of extreme weather patterns. In Johnston, you could learn about new methods of high-performing seed production, plant genomics, nutrition enhancement, and molecular phenotyping. You'd see advances we're making in a new breakthrough capability called CRISPR-Cas. With CRISPR, breeding can be targeted to deliver a trait faster, more precisely, and much cheaper than the modern techniques. And unlike GMO foods, no foreign DNA is added in CRISPR. So for instance, just rice DNA in rice, corn DNA in corn, wheat DNA, and so on. Now, CRISPR technology has already gained the widespread interest of the scientific community. This is an issue that's very real to us at Corteva because next year we will conduct a commercial plot with the first product developed using CRISPR technology. It's a corn variety we expect to be launched in the following year, 5 years earlier than any product that we've ever been able to launch before. Our hope is that this will open up a new era of innovation across our entire industry with a slew of ag innovations in diverse crops and foods. So already we have generated promising research advances for better control of diseases, better yields, improvements in food quality, and very importantly, improvements in water use efficiency. So much opportunity here for everyone across the entire food science spectrum. One thing we absolutely do know is we cannot feed the world without continued innovation in food science. We're going to have to double food production by 2050 to feed those 10 billion people. The status quo is just not going to cut it. I believe this is indeed our moonshot moment. Corteva is a manifestation of those three trends in food security, food integrity, and food science and technology. We're standing up a company and betting our future on addressing those needs. Our vision is to shape the future of agriculture by growing not just food, but by growing progress. We'll do that by bringing our global presence, depth and knowledge, and diverse resources to bear so that farms and farmers can flourish, consumers can thrive, and communities and economies can benefit. Across South Asia, Africa, and the developing world, we'll continue to provide on-the-ground agronomy and seed and protection to support smallholder farmers, including thousands of women, so that their farms can grow and prosper. In Europe, Latin America markets around the world, we'll continue to push the limits of digital technologies to help farmers optimize their yields on sub-acre levels. And in water-stressed or soil-depleted areas, we'll provide some best practices around planting and harvesting solutions that benefit the environment and provide a much more sustainable livelihood for farming families. We are committed to working with governments, with NGOs, and the private sector to ensure we achieve this balance in how we expand agriculture's reach. We have extensive projects underway in places like Africa with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create a more sustainable agricultural practice and actually help build communities. Now, there's one ag leader who truly understands the power of business, government, and civil society coming together to improve the lives of farmers and farming communities and the people that they feed. This is someone I have a great deal of respect for. It's our former USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack. So we've had an opportunity to sit down with Secretary Vilsack over the last couple of weeks, and we filmed a short video of part of that conversation. So let's take a moment now to maybe hear from the former Secretary.
We just simply take too long, and in this day and age, we face very serious competition. U.S. agriculture faces competition. If it takes months and months or years for new technologies to get into a field, we lose out to competition that is moving more quickly in other countries. So there are an awful lot of opportunities here for regulatory changes, for a more streamlined process, and certainly business can have input in that. And then finally, I think it's important and necessary for there to be a joint partnership between companies and the government on a commitment to the environment, on appropriate stewardship, on defining how we can take care of our land best so that it continues to provide and nourish, how we can restrict our use of water so that we're not forced to, as we may be forced in the western U.S., to choose between farming and growing cities because we simply don't have the water resources to do it all. So my vision would be that we see agriculture prosper and expand all over the world to create a base and a foundation for economies in developing countries, to create work and employment opportunities, to put people to work, to be able to meet the growing need, that we have scientists in labs and facilities all over the world trying to figure out how to use science in an effective way to be able to expand yields while using less pesticides and less chemicals and less water and being able to replenish and renourish the soil. The vision of agriculture involves a lot of young people getting excited about being in farming or in agribusiness to be able to promote and to market new opportunities. It was when I was Secretary of Agriculture for the United States, we did a study looking at employment opportunities, and we were surprised that so few young people were being educated in our colleges and universities for opportunities in agribusiness, that there were literally thousands of job opportunities, good paying job opportunities. So my vision for agriculture is pretty expansive, pretty comprehensive, and very hopeful and very optimistic.
So obviously the Secretary talked a lot about global opportunities, but the opportunity for ag is also very local. Right here in Philadelphia and throughout Pennsylvania and Delaware, we continue to work with schools, with clubs, with organizations like 4-H and FFA to better build an understanding of nutrition and agriculture and to create a greater interest in this whole dynamic industry. And we start to do that at a much earlier age. Our aim is not to just grow progress for the next quarter or the next quarter century. By starting at an early age, we want to start to do this for generations to come. So is all of what I talked about quite ambitious? We don't think so. Our people around the world are already hard at work in over 130 countries, bringing new ideas and new technologies to farmers today to help them maximize yields and protect their investments. Now, in addition to farmers, we're also listening to hundreds of rural community leaders, to local and national government officials, and environmentalists and NGOs. We're going to use the convening power of our brand to bring together major food and beverage producers like Tyson and Smithfield and Coca-Cola and Nestle to discuss the best practices and explore the ag standards and protocols that we could apply going forward. And of course, we're listening to consumers intently. So here's where Philadelphia comes back into the story. This great community, of course, is an important center for bioscience research globally and technology innovations. You're also in a state that is among the most important agricultural producers in the eastern U.S. We're going to need the best that this community has to offer to generate those new breakthroughs in agronomy, in chemistry, in biotechnology, and environmental science. We're going to need your energy and your commitment and your passion to build a stronger community and a more peaceful and prosperous world. And we need organizations like the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia to stay vigilant in your examination of things like global trade and some of these global macroeconomic issues that we're struggling with today. The world cannot afford to have agriculture politicized through unjust trade restrictions and other costly measures. We need to continue to promote sound science-based thinking and to stamp down intolerance of science-based dialogue. Cool heads need to prevail, not only in Washington, but in capitals all around the world. So we look forward to our continued partnership with each of you. We certainly thank every one of you here tonight for your personal leadership in the community. And to the World Affairs Council, we thank you once again for this great Atlas Award honor tonight and appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about our new company. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Craig.
I want to sort of pick up from one of the places that you left off. I think you can make an argument that one of the greatest challenges that you and the industry may face isn't on the science side, but on the sort of the issue of the cultural climate. There is growing skepticism, and at times in some sectors, outright rejectionism regarding the application of science and technology to food.
Right.
We as a society have come such a long way from the acceptance of the idea of better living through chemistry. That phrase now seems almost impossible to be used kind of in a way that would bring people together. Collective understanding about what many people view as errors or untoward consequences of science, whether it's DDT, Agent Orange, the fears that people have about GMOs. So I guess the question that I have is, how do you convince people, the consumers that you need, and the political leaders that respond to those consumers as voters, how do you convince them that in order to feed the world, there has to be the continued further, even accelerated application of science to agriculture, and to see that as a positive rather than a threat?
It's a great question, and as we talked about, it's certainly probably the larger part of the challenge, because I believe the same thing that you do, that science will find a way. the tools and the capabilities and the minds that we have, we will be in a position to solve these issues. It's getting to the social acceptance of those technologies. And I think what we're learning is, first, it starts with a lot more listening and understanding. I think in the past the industry was a little too enamored with the science and was talking more to try to be understood versus trying to understand. So we've started a series within Corteva. We call it the Insight Series, where I'll take 6 or 8 of my most senior business leaders, and we will go to a venue. We've been in California, we were in Europe, we were in Paris, we were in Brussels, and we will invite some of maybe the staunchest protesters of the technology to join us for a couple of days. We do a lot of listening. We talk about the challenges and the opportunities. We share some of the things that we're working on. And we have a few meals together, and we spend a little time together. We get to know each other. And I remember a story from this last Insight series that I was in. I was sitting next to a young lady, and about halfway through the process, she leaned over and she kind of touched me on the arm, and she says, "I got to tell you, you folks are really nice people." And so you start there. Now, how do you get millions of people around the world? You can't spend all of that time, but it starts with the reputation and what you stand for and how you talk about who you are. So we're going to start there and invite folks in to have a discussion. The second, I think it comes with what is the science solving for? And in the past, it might not have solved for things that would have had a consumer benefit or perceived as something attractive. But I mentioned CRISPR earlier. We're working on some exciting things like the ability to create a dry-seeded rice product that would eliminate the need for fresh water in rice paddies all around the world. Can you imagine producing one of the most nutritious available food crops in the world without consuming the kind of water that we do today? It's a very exciting construct. One of the other things we're working on is through CRISPR, we can knock out or silence some of the bad things in food. And one of these is the allergen that's in peanuts, and have the ability to make that tremendous food source of protein available to so many more people around the world that suffer from food allergies, and there are others. So I think that's the second piece, is focusing on science and technologies solutions that have an even broader benefit, not just in agriculture. And then the third thing is we have to be a part of being an advocate for the great things that are already going on. I meet with farmers all the time, and a grower will walk up to me and say, how could anyone believe that my #1 priority is not the absolute stewardship and sustainability of this land that my great-great-grandfather was born on, that has been handed down to me, and I have 2 children that I know the world needs to be able to feed them going forward. How could anyone believe that I am not taking the absolute best care of that land possible with what I spray on it, with what I plant in it, and how I manage it? So there are some really great things going on. I think that's the third piece, is we've got to talk about the good that is out there. So we've made that a core part of our Corteva strategy going forward.
Thanks. I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the intersection between the technical challenge of increasing yields, the intersection of that and climate change. Do you see the potential that climate change makes it impossible to feed the world because of the disappearance of arable land, or that the solutions to the food issue itself become additive to the climate problem? So are the two things sort of irreconcilably opposed to each other?
They are both moving and changing, and so I'll just take climate in the U.S. for a moment. When I grew up, my father, I said, was second-generation DuPonter. We had a small piece of land in Memphis, Tennessee, and we were at almost the virtual northernmost point where the most productive varieties of soybeans were grown. A decade later, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, I mean, the industry had bred soybeans to grow in even those more northern, cooler climates. Today, we're growing soybeans in Canada. It's one of the fastest growing crops. So as the weather has changed and permitted more and more land to be used in production. We have also moved the technology forward to try to stay ahead of it. So we're moving in maybe the same circles, chasing it a little bit. The same goes for Europe. Back in the Roman times, all of the grapes in Europe were produced mostly in the UK, not in France, but that has now, moved. There are different crops that are now more available to us. And so we're in a constant scramble to try to keep up with those changes. Add to that moisture, working on crops that are more drought tolerant. So that enables us to produce a crop in an environment that has its own protection, that if the weather goes wrong that year, but now we're able to grow crops in southern Texas or in the Middle East that we never could before. But that drought tolerance capability gives that plant a more robust ability to just actually be produced in those environments. So we're actually expanding that access to land. And then the third factor is what's happening to the good land. You think about the city of Chicago, just south of Chicago, it's sitting on some of the most fertile farmland in the United States. And every day there's a new housing subdivision, there's a new shopping mall going in. We're actually chewing up the best land, which is forcing ag productivity to go to the more marginal areas as well, which is a bad thing. And I can add others, salination, we're getting saltwater encroachment in some of these other areas. So the science is going to be necessary to keep up with these changes and cycle with them so that we continue to drive productivity on the lands that we'll have available.
So there is, I've read about some what seem like almost science fiction approaches to this problem that go sort of off the land in two directions. One is the notion of seaweed farming and making seaweeds either a crop for livestock or a crop for humans directly. With the idea being you don't need land, you don't need water, so it's essentially unlimited. And the other idea being this idea of laboratory grown meat. Mm-hmm. Are either of them in your wheelhouse, and how do you see them sort of comparing to the increasing of productivity on the land?
We're not working in either one of those areas today, but as a business person, my belief is we're going to need other solutions here. We're going to need multiple shots on goals to solve the problem. I'll give you one other statistic, and we're focused mostly on row cropping, land-based row cropping. Every year we hold a yield contest with the Corn Growers Association, where growers all across the country will compete to see what is the best yield that you can get off of an acre of land. So average corn yields in the United States are about 175 bushels an acre. The really good productive farmers on the really rich organic soils in Iowa or Indiana, they'll get above 200. They can get 220, 230 bushels an acre. Last year's winner from a farm in North Carolina, growing a Pioneer product, by the way, produced 520 bushels an acre off of his farm, with the same corn plant that a commercial grower would produce in Iowa. So what's the interesting dilemma here is that plant has on board today the capability of producing 520 bushels an acre, but we're only getting on average about 170 out of that. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of other factors. Weather, you mentioned already. There's nutrients, how do we, the fertility. There's the science of how we space those plants and how we manage the amount of sunlight that hits the leaves. There's pest management, making sure we're getting after all the weeds that would be robbing, the plant of moisture and other insect pests. So I believe we're at the front edge of using other tools like digital and all of those capabilities to manage the 100 other variables that we haven't even started working on yet. So I think a big leap in productivity is going to come in that next wave of the data science associated with farming.
Last one from me, and then we'll take a question or two from the audience before we go to dinner.
Great.
You talked about food security. Is there also a priority being placed on food equality, right? So already in the United States, we see this real division in the nutritional value of foods consumed by folks with less money versus more affluent Americans. Affluent Americans turning towards much cleaner foods, locally sourced, all the things that you described, and those things just not being accessible for poorer folks. And that's to say nothing of the division between the developed world and the underdeveloped world. So, as in addition to just increasing yields all around, how do you deal with equality and distribution issues?
The equality, the distribution, the nutritional value of those crops. It's why I mentioned that we're going to try to use our place in that entire food chain and our brand and what we're trying to stand for as a convening authority for others that also participate, the downstream food players, those that are in the packaged food and fresh food businesses, the animal production industry, and sit down and start to talk about that whole equality equation by making the starting point, the grains that are used to feed those systems, cheaper and more readily available. You see an uptick. I also believe that the economic viability of communities, you start with farmers, and when farmers have more money, they invest in their operation, they invest in their communities, they raise the economic progress of that community, and before you know it, you see diets coming up the scale as well. And then I think we've just got to get food production closer to where the demand is. So we know that the large countries, U.S. and Brazil, are producing an inordinate percent of what is needed to sustain the globe. And so getting African growers up to the same kind of agronomic standards that we have in North America, India, another great country, even China still has a long way to go in terms of the agronomic power of what they have there, right there in their own soil. And so I think it has to start there. It starts with the farmer, it starts about helping them be better, they'll invest more, and it'll start that virtuous cycle of economic development that should raise all boats.
Thank you. Okay, so we have time for like one or two. Ian, and Christy will bring you a microphone.
Thank you, Jim, for sharing with us what you're trying to do with Corteva. I've had the opportunity to do a bike ride, rag ride across Iowa, and I've seen many fields with Pioneer seed. So it is an amazing experience to spend 6 days, 7 days riding across Iowa and seeing all that.
That's good.
But a more relevant business question, and I'm involved in the chemical industry as well, is the consolidation that's going on with ChemChina acquiring Syngenta and Bayer acquiring Monsanto. Do you see that consolidation a result, and you're part of it as well,
right.
Having similar agenda, that you'll work together with the same kinds of objectives to feed the future growing populations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I talked earlier about these tremendous forces that are going on in the industry. So part of those consolidations are actually a response to the needs that companies like Dow and DuPont had to, first of all, more quickly and with a tremendously larger breadth and depth of solutions respond to all of those needs. And one company just didn't have all of the solutions. So when we merged the two together, we created a much larger germplasm pool for breeding. We created a larger chemistry and technology pipeline. So we really did get access to more things under one roof that we could put together as a solution. The second reason that's driving all of that is you're familiar that the agriculture industry over the last 5 years has been particularly challenging. We've produced 5 record crops in a row, which has driven commodity prices to some pretty low levels, which has put pressure on farm incomes and on our customers' ability to afford the technologies that are out there. So it means we need to focus on doing things even more from a cost productivity perspective, get things more economically available to our customers. So that's about driving out cost. And when you put two companies together, there are obviously overlaps and things that you can eliminate that help to reduce our cost, and we can pass those savings along to our customers so they can continue to buy our products. The third reason for some of these consolidations is the technologies that we've been here talking about are getting more expensive and taking much longer to bring to fruition. When I started in the industry, it might have taken $150 million in 5 years to get a new chemistry product through the regulatory hurdles. Now in Europe, we plan for a decade from the time we give them the dossiers until we get the final review, and we could spend upwards of $400 million to deliver that product. And so companies need the financial wherewithal, the structure of a larger company to be able to afford putting $400 million at risk for a 10-year return that may or may not make it if a regulator decides for some strange reason that they're not going to support the chemistry. So all of those three things have really combined to create the waves of consolidation that you've seen. Yeah. It's a little hard for me to speculate on the specific strategies that ChemChina or even now Sinochem and Syngenta would have. What I can say is China as a market for us has been a particularly challenging one to penetrate because of some of the intellectual property things that are so famously talked about. That said, they've now just acquired one of the big ag technology players in the industry, and we're starting to see signs already that their desire to protect their own technology is starting to pervade. So we believe it should lead to an era where they're going to want to protect their stuff and put the kinds of protections and laws in place that will allow others. We also believe that it will open up that market for more competition today. There are, I think at last count, there are over 8,000 seed companies in China. And that's just too fragmented for an industry to really grow now with the Syngenta ChemChina and now us and a few others gaining access to that market. It should allow for more progress there. Great question. Thanks.
Jim, knowing I'm Mike Quaranta with the Delaware State Chamber, knowing that I'm standing between everyone and dinner, I'll make this quick. You mentioned Iowa State University. My daughter is an Iowa Hawkeye at the University of Iowa, so she'd shame me if I didn't give it a plug.
Same geography.
Quick question. You talked a lot about population growth. What about the convergence of people living longer and health and beta carotene and blindness and things like that? Is anything like that on the radar for the company?
I think I would just add that not only is the population getting bigger, you're right. Part of the reason that those numbers are growing is the longevity as well. So it's certainly contributing to that. There are some vitamins and opportunities in plant products that we're working on today, mostly with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that allow a food that everyone eats, a cassava or sugarcane, to be a part of helping to prevent some very preventable diseases based on just changing early nutritional values, especially in children. And so, yes, we are working on some opportunities. The strange thing about that is some of these are GMO products, and the countries that need the solutions the most would not allow their cultivation because of the way that they're created. So it becomes quite an ethical discussion here of, which one takes precedent, protecting people or, so it is an interesting debate, but we're making progress. And Gates Foundation has been extraordinary. They believe in the science. They're big supporters of helping us to gain access, and some of the countries that we're dealing with are really dealing with quite an epidemic, and they're looking for some answers. And I think, back to your earlier question, that's where the need has to become so great and the demand so strong that it overweighs some of the other more developed nation problems that we have. So, great.
Okay. Dinner is served. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.